Well, good morning. That wasn't my planned introduction this morning, but it works. That's right, it works. But I'm one of the pastors here on staff, Nate Ingvoldstad. For those who didn't hear my name shouted out earlier. One of the pastors here at Grace. And this morning we're going to continue in our series about Yeshua, Messiah King. And we're going to continue as we've been doing, as we're looking chronologically and just moving through all four of the Gospels as we study the life of Jesus. And this morning, we're going to be diving into John 5. Yes, I just said the whole chapter of John. Not the whole John, but the whole chapter 5 of John. Phil, the last 2 weeks, has had 8 verses in 2 weeks. But today, we're going through 47 verses. So buckle up. Buckle up. So this morning, we're going to dig into John 5, if you want to turn there. But before we get going, is there anyone who doesn't have notes or a Bible? Is there anyone here who needs notes or a Bible? Paul back there. Anybody else? Davey up here with notes? Okay. Roger, we have one more up here. Davey. Anybody else? All right. Well, before I became a pastor here at Grace, like many of you know, Megan and I, my wife and I, we were missionaries in the Philippines on the tiny little island called Barangunan. And we got into a lot of, we'd get ourselves into a lot of maybe what you would call even trouble there on Barangunan. One day, a guy came to me with his son, and his tooth was kind of sideways in his mouth, like a little baby tooth. And so I just yanked it out with pliers. And so the next day, I came back, and they had somebody come with an actual, toothache, and he wanted me to pull his real tooth. And so I was scared and ran back into the house and didn't do it. But I came home on furlough, and I told that story here. And one of you guys actually bought me a whole set of teeth pullers. So I went back, now armed with a YouTube education of pulling teeth and a bunch of dangerous dental tools back to the island. And I started pulling teeth, it's just crazy, right? You're all shaking your heads like, what in the world? Because it was crazy. So what, though, began to happen is that we'd already shared the gospel, we'd already had a church there, but then people from other islands would hear about this, and they would come over, and they would show up on my doorstep, and a lot of times how they would show up on my doorstep was with this huge swelling on their face, and just in excruciating pain. And it looked so horrible how it would be. It was just this massive swelling on their face, and a lot of them, they couldn't sleep. They'd been up, grown men up all night crying just because of the pain that was there. A good Kuyunan word on the island, kapabaga, means, you can say that if you want, kapabaga means swelling. So they'd come with this huge, nasty, swollen face, and they'd be looking for help. And so what I would have to do is, you can't just pull a tooth with, the face being so swollen. Number one, for the pain, and then you can also, it's pretty dangerous. You can actually cause the infection to spread, and it's so close to your brain that it's actually a pretty dangerous thing. And so first what you do is you give an antibiotic. So I would give penicillin. But one of the problems on Barangunan is once, the penicillin will actually usually work sometimes within a few hours, it would begin to relieve the pain, the pressure for them. But one of the problems was a lot of times they would stop taking the penicillin at that point. And so you would have this infection that had a little dose of medicine, and then it would come back stronger, and it could be quite dangerous. And so I, of course, would use the opportunity to really just scare them and say, look, if you don't finish all of these pills in the same amount of time, you're going to die. And my attempt was, hey, you need to take all of these pills in order to do this. And so actually over time, I wanted to stop pulling teeth because, it was horrible. Your fingers, I'd wear gloves, but you can imagine teeth who haven't seen dentist tools forever. They're 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old coming to you with these teeth that have never seen the dentist. They were, you can imagine. So my hands would just, even with the gloves on, would stink. And so I would want to get out of this job of pulling teeth. I always wanted to get out of it, but I never did because it got me into a certain discussion that I could always have with these people who would come from other islands. And I could always get into the discussion about death. Right? It led me, dental, pulling teeth, doing this act would move me into a discussion where I could talk about death and I could share the gospel with them, which they'd never heard because of this dental practice, because of pulling teeth. So I could reveal to them truth about God because I would do this thing for them. I would pull their teeth. I could move me into a conversation where I could reveal God's truth to them. So this morning, we're going to see a similar situation with Jesus. So he's going to go into a place, and we're going to see him doing a miraculous work. He's going to heal a man. But he's going to do it on a specific day. He's going to cross boundaries. He's going to push into these kind of sacred cow areas of Jewish culture. And he's going to do it not just to heal someone, but he's going to do it to get into a specific conversation. Right? He has a place that he is looking to go. He is going to reveal something about himself. He's going to reveal truth to the Jewish people, to the Jewish leaders first, but then to the nation of Israel, that he wants to tell them, and he wants them to believe in him. Because of this truth, he wants them to believe in him as Messiah, as their king, and to accept him that way. So this is the reason he does this. So go ahead and look at John 5. John 5. So in Jerusalem at the time that Jesus lived, there was a pool called Bethesda, and it was a pool, a bunch of water that was collected in two pools. And at this pool called Bethesda, John tells us it's by a place called the Sheep Gate, so it gives us a pretty exact location. And at this pool, there were people who were sick. They congregated at this pool. There were those who were blind, who were lame, those who couldn't walk, and they all seemed to congregate at this pool. And they were hoping that they would be healed of their sickness. Right? Why or by whom they were healed, you might ask, that's the question. But what happened was at this pool, there was something that occurred, an event, and we're told other places that somehow the pool was stirred up, and the Jews or the Gentiles that were around the pool, they believed that the first people to jump in, or the first person to jump into this pool, would be healed of whatever sickness they had. So they may be jumped, they may throw themselves in, but if they got in first, something happened at this pool, and they would be healed of their sickness. Now, we don't know really what exactly happened there. We don't know how or by who this healing would occur, but it's safe to assume that something happened at this pool, or there wouldn't be people congregated around there. So there's a pool, there's many sick and lame people around it, and Jesus enters the scene in this area. He's back in Jerusalem, we're told. He's back there to celebrate a feast of the Jews. Now this could be one of 3 feasts that all Jewish males were required by the Mosaic law to attend. And so we see Jesus is back in Jerusalem. He's obeying the Mosaic law. He's obedient in this area, and he's come there to worship. And it is while he is there that he decides to go to this pool called Bethesda. He goes and he enters in to this pool ground. And as he walks in, he looks around, and he sees all these people, these sick, these lame, lying around on mats or possibly sitting. Or there's just a multitude of people there. And as he looks around, he is drawn to a certain man. Or his eye kind of collects over there as this certain man. And John tells us that this man, Jesus knows this man has been there for 38 years. He's been lame. He hasn't been able to walk for 38 years. And so Jesus has pity on this man, and he approaches him, and he asks him this, pretty simple question. He asks him, do you want to be healed? Do you want to be healed? And this is a different way that Jesus is going about this healing. Right? We know he's going to be healed. But the way Jesus goes about this is totally different than any other place we've seen before. Right? For one, Jesus goes to this man. Right? The man doesn't come to him. It's not dropped down from the ceiling to Jesus. So Jesus goes, he seeks this guy out. Right? And we don't know, maybe he sought him out because this guy is carrying, he's laying on the biggest mat. I don't know. But Jesus seeks this man out. He looks for him. And secondly, it's different because Jesus doesn't ask any faith of this man. He doesn't ask him that, he has to believe that Jesus has the ability to heal him. Right? He just simply picks him out, and he asks him if he wants to be healed. And when Jesus asks the man if he wants to be healed, the man looks back at Jesus, and he answers him a bit mysteriously. He says, he wants to, well, he doesn't say he wants to, but he says, he has no one to throw him into the water. Right? So it's not that he doesn't want to be healed, but he has no one to throw him into the water. He's there by himself, and there's no one to help him. And so Jesus, possibly this guy actually thought maybe Jesus would sit with him a while, and maybe Jesus could possibly throw him into the water or push him in when it was stirred up and he would be healed. But we know Jesus, he doesn't need water to heal this guy. He doesn't need water to heal and make this man well. He simply, what does he do? He simply speaks. Right? And images in our mind should go to, in the beginning, when the Word of God actually just spoke and creation came into existence. Right? The same way, Jesus simply speaks. And as he speaks, and he tells the man, get up, take your mat, walk, go home. And as he tells him this, his legs, just all of a sudden these legs who haven't held his own body weight for 38 years, instantly become strong. You can imagine the sensation for the man, right? As he hasn't been able to wiggle his toes, feel his legs, and all of a sudden these feelings, these pulses, these electronic signals are just pulsing through his legs, and he stands up, and he picks his mat up, and he goes out into the streets of Jerusalem. And what a commotion, this must have caused. I mean, he was known there at this pool. Right? He'd been lame for 38 years. I'm sure he frequented there often. What a commotion it would have caused as he stood up, walked on his legs, and went out into the streets of Jerusalem. A commotion would have caused certainly there in the pool there at Bethesda, but then all the way home, I imagine, as he's walking, what would you do for the first time if you are walking for the first time in 38 years? How would you walk home? And I wouldn't be slow, or maybe I would be slow and just enjoy that process. But you can imagine the commotion that this caused. How could you keep quiet? How could you keep quiet? Well, this could be the end of the story, right? We could cut this story off right here, and this could be the end. But instead of being the end, this story here takes an unexpected turn. And you may ask why. Why are we turning unexpectedly here? It's because this detail that John drops in at this point. And John tells us that it was the Sabbath. That Jesus specifically came to this pool, to Bethesda, knowing there were men and women there who were lame, who were sick, who were blind, who could not walk. And he specifically heals this guy on the Sabbath. Now, why is that important? Why would it matter, the day of the week that he healed this guy on? Right? Why would it be such a big deal? Well, if we kind of think back to the history of Israel, when God led the people out of Egypt, he gave them 613 laws, and we call that, or we refer to that as the Mosaic Law. And the Mosaic Law wasn't a bad thing at all. It wasn't a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. It was this wonderful gift that God had given to the people of Israel. Right? They had been slaves in Egypt for 400 years, and now God was in the process of bringing them back into the promised land, back into the land of Israel. So the law, it was a gift that instructed Israel how to live in this new land. Right? It instructed them how to relate to their neighboring countries. Right? How to be a light to them, not to be like them. How to relate to each other. Right? How to govern themselves. And then it also taught them how to relate and how they were to relate to God. And one of these laws that God gave the people of Israel was concerning a day of rest. It was called a Sabbath. And God instructed the Israelites that they were to work 6 days, but on the seventh day that they were to stop their normal work and they were to rest. They were to take a break. And it wasn't a punishment, but rather the Sabbath was a gift. Right? A Sabbath was a gift to them. It was supposed to be a delight to the people of Israel. It was supposed to be a delight. And God didn't go into great detail. He didn't really get into the nuances of what they were and weren't allowed to do on this day of rest, although there are some places where he does give clarifications. But it wasn't he didn't go into big detail. He simply wanted this to be a day that was different than other days. Right? A day where the people were not to do normal work. It was to be a time of enjoying their families. It was to be a time of rest. It was to be a time where they could reflect and think about the things of God. So this day, this Sabbath day, was to be a day that was set apart, that was different than the others' days. They were to abstain from their normal work, and they were to rest. But as Phil discussed last week, and he brought up this time of Ezra, and if you remember, the people of Israel had been in captivity in Babylon during the time of Ezra, and they were now coming back into the land of Israel. So this is a different group of captives who are being set free. They're coming back into Israel, and they were put into captivity in Babylon because they broke the Mosaic law, because they took other gods, and they disregarded the Mosaic law. And so, in their desire to not ever do that again, right, Ezra leads the people, and they have a group of people called scribes called the Sophrim, and they would meet and they would debate, and they created these additional laws around the Mosaic law, and we talked about them as fences last week. And the desire was that if they put these laws or this protective hedge around the Mosaic law, it would help, or it would make it so that the people of Israel would not be able to cross and to get and to actually go against or to disobey the Mosaic law. And so this wasn't really, a bad thing, but it became a bad thing as the fences began to become more and more developed, and they were elevated to a place where they were said to have come from God through Moses. Right? Their origin was claimed to be from God, and their authority was from him as well. So the oral law, by the time of Jesus, had been elevated to a place of equality with God's perfect law, the Mosaic law. And this was a problem. And so keeping the Sabbath day became a huge deal. So the Sophrim really focused on building fences around the Sabbath. In fact, we're told that there's over 1,500 laws concerning just the Sabbath day. So there's in the oral law, not the Mosaic law, but in the oral law, there's over 1,500 laws concerning this one law about keeping the Sabbath. And the rabbis even described it as a mountain suspended in air, hung by a string. So the string was this one law given to the people about keeping the Sabbath. And this mountain of laws was created and hung just on that one string. Now, you can imagine this was heavy. This was a huge deal. It seemed like it possibly was more work to try to keep the Sabbath than to just simply rest on the Sabbath. And for example, when the Sophrim, just to give you an example of some of the laws, when the Sophrim looked and they read, you're to not work on the Sabbath, they had to then define, okay, well, what's work? Right? We have to be able to define then, if we're not to work, then what is work? And so they sat around, they debated and they discussed, and they would bring up ideas. Some of these ideas would be like spitting, right? Could spitting possibly be work? And they would think, and they would debate, and they would talk, and they would say, yeah, it could be, right? Because if you think about it, when you spit, and if, let's say you're in a field or you're out, in the dust, not on the cement, but if you're out in the dust and you spit, what happens to your spit, right? Not just a little flicky spit. I mean, a good spit. What happens if you spit? It does what on the ground? It makes a little divot, right? And the divot is wet. And what would happen if a bird flew over, or maybe if you even just kicked a seed? If a bird flew, dropped a seed in the ground, or you kicked a seed into the hole, then you would have plowed, right? You created the divot. You would have watered, right? And so now you have done the things of a farmer, and you're guilty of crossing the Sabbath, and you worked. So this is the type of laws that they were creating. They were really examining what it would mean to work. So you can imagine, though, 1,500 laws like this. Right? 1,500 laws like this, and it was hard. It became difficult to keep the Sabbath day of rest because these laws hung around their necks like a weight. It was difficult. Another area that the oral law pushed into was concerning carrying a load on the Sabbath, right? How much could you carry, and how far could you carry something without it being considered work, right? What could you carry around? Like, could you carry a book? Could you carry a glass of water? Could you carry a load? What could you carry, and how far could you carry it without it being considered work? So they came up with some rules, and they said, you know what, if you could carry something, but it couldn't go farther than about 1 kilometer. You couldn't travel more than 1 kilometer. But then they also made a law that you couldn't move something. So this is the oral law we're talking again. You couldn't move something from one domain to another. So for example, if I was carrying like a glass of water, I could carry the glass of water around my house all day if I wanted to. So I could carry my glass because I was in this single domain. But the second that I moved and I took my glass of water and I walked out, I crossed the threshold of my house and I walked outside, I was now moving or transporting something from one domain to another. So I was breaking the Sabbath, and I was working. Okay, so this idea of domains and carrying things became a big issue. So this is why John tells his readers that it was the Sabbath. The man who Jesus healed, right, if we go back to him, if you remember, what was he doing now? Right, he's loose on the streets of Jerusalem, and he is carrying his mat. So he moved his mat from one domain, the pool, outside into the street, and he was possibly going home and going into another domain. Right, so this man is loose on the street, and he's breaking the Sabbath. He carried his mat, and he's out there walking through the streets. And not only that was the man guilty, right? But we see Jesus is guilty of working on the Sabbath. He healed the man, and then he commanded this man to break Sabbath law. So now we have an issue. So let's pick up in verse 10, and we'll read there. So John chapter 5, verse 10. So the Jews, they said to the man who had been healed, "It's the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed." But he answered them, "The man who healed me, that man said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" And they asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" And now the man who had been healed didn't know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in the place. And afterward Jesus found him in the temple, and he said to him, "See, you're well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." The man went away, and he told the Jews that it was Jesus who has healed him. So rather quickly, you see the religious leaders find this guy. Or maybe he was loud, I don't know, walked a long ways, carried a big mat. For whatever reason, they see this guy, and they confront him. And he defends himself. How does he defend himself? That guy, like this guy who healed me, and you can imagine he tells him the story. It's amazing. This guy, he heals me, and then he tells me, of course I pick up my mat and I walk. And it wasn't his fault, right? He's just obeying the guy that healed him. But the only problem was in this commotion of Jesus healing him, he didn't stop and ask him who he was. He has no idea who Jesus is. Right? And I get that. I get that. You can imagine 38 years this guy has wanted to walk. He's waited, he's dreamed, he hasn't been able to wiggle his toes, and then all of a sudden like this, he can feel his legs, he can wiggle his toes, he can stand, he can carry something. And of course he forgets to ask who the guy was because this is so amazing. And he walks on. And the story, I think, could end here as well. And we could stop. The story could end here if Jesus was simply being a good citizen and healing somebody, if Jesus was just caring for the poor, if that was the only point of this story, Jesus would have stopped here, right? He pulled the wool over the religious leader's eyes. He healed the guy on the Sabbath. Now he snuck away. Doesn't have to say anything. But it doesn't end there, right? Jesus goes to the man. He finds him in the temple, which is an interesting thing to be said about the man. Where does he go? He's just been healed. He doesn't know who heals him, but he rightly goes, and possibly he's there thanking God. Right? He rightly knows how he was healed. It was God who healed him. So he goes there, and Jesus finds him. He could have just backed off. He healed the man. That's enough. He could have backed off, but no, he goes and he finds the man and he tells him, he reveals who he is. And so the man, for some reason, what does he do next? For some reason, he goes and he tells the Jews. So he reports to the religious leaders and he tells them that it was Jesus who healed him. And now we begin to see the real reason for the healing. Right? Jesus was about to reveal to the religious leaders this earth-shattering revelation about who he is. About who he is. He wasn't just trying to stick it to them. Right? He wasn't just trying to break the Sabbath law to knuckle, prove it in, and kind of make them mad. No, he has a point, and he's looking to reveal to the religious leaders who he is, because he wants them to turn and to accept him as Messiah. And so he uses this event with the paralytic to get him into this conversation with the religious leaders. Let's continue there in John 5, and we'll pick up in 16. And this is why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." This is why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but now he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. So John explains to us, in no uncertain terms, exactly what was happening, right? Exactly why the religious leaders were persecuting him, or they were opposing him, or confronting him. And the reason was he's breaking the oral law of the Sabbath. That is why they're confronting him. But then Jesus answers them, right? He answers them in this interesting way. He says, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." So he answers them in this interesting way, and now they move from persecuting him, and now they want him dead, because they get what Jesus is saying. They understand exactly what he's saying. Jesus is now claiming to be equal with God, meaning he is claiming to be God himself. And this is abundantly clear to the religious leaders. We see that in their reaction. But how they get there may not be clear to us as Westerners looking in on this story. Why they get to the point where they understand what Jesus' claim was, being a claim of equalness with God. How did they get there? Well, first, Jesus claimed to be God's son, right? He said, "My Father." And when he uses that term, "my Father," that is a different way than the rest of Israel would use or would talk to speak about God. They would say, in the plural, they would say, "our Father." So when Jesus says, "my Father," he's doing something very different than any other rabbi or any other Jewish person would in their prayers to God. He's referring to them in the single pronoun, right? This is "my Father." So he's distinguishing his closeness with God, right? His closeness with God. Secondly, he calls him his Father, right? In our Western view, a son is less than a father, but in a Jewish worldview, the son is equal to the Father. So by calling him his Father, by using this personal pronoun, Jesus is signaling something to them. Also, Jesus doesn't deny that he was working on the Sabbath, does he? He doesn't say, "It wasn't me. This is not actually work. Let me explain to you what it was." No, he doesn't do that. It's not his defense. What he says is his Father's working, so is he. So the Jews understood that God did work on the Sabbath. They realized that he had to work on the Sabbath, that in birth, that in death, that in causing the rains, right, those all things happen on the Sabbath. They don't care what day it is. And so God has a hand in all of those things, and so he works on the Sabbath. And Jesus is claiming equality with that, right? He says, "My Father does it, and I do it." Like, why is that such a big deal, right? He does it, I do it. Of course I do it. I do it because he does it. And the religious leaders, they get it. They know exactly what he's saying. And here again, we come to another place. A good idea, maybe, for Jesus to simply, right, he's made his point. They're ticked, right? Now they want to kill him. They don't have a good plan yet, but they want to kill him. Here we go. Another place, Jesus, good time, back out. right? If it was me, I'm probably gone at this point, right? This is a good time for the story to stop, but it doesn't, right? It doesn't stop. Instead of ending the conversation, we see Jesus, he further reveals his relationship as the Son to God as the Father. This relationship that he possesses, he reveals it to them. Let's look in chapter 5, verse 19. We'll continue on. So Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of his own accord, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, that the Son does likewise. For the Father loves the Son, and he shows him all that he himself is doing. And greater works than these will he show him, so that you may marvel. For as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, so also the Son gives life to whom he will." So in this first point he's making is that he is equal to the Father because he does the works of his Father as an equal. Or what the Father does, he does. What the Son does, the Father does. That they're equal. There's this relationship there. If it's the Father's work, it's the Son's work. Right? They're an equal in a power and ability to give life. And this idea of giving life, that the Jews, they understood this was something only God did. So Jesus is claiming that he has this power, this authority as well. He's claiming to be God. Let's continue on in verse 22. "For the Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son, just as they honor the Father. Whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him." Jesus claims again he's equal to God because he is going to judge all men. The Father has given him that responsibility, and he is going to be doing the final judgment. The Jews understood this. This is a thing that God only does. Only God does this. Again, Jesus claims to do the things. He will do the things that only God does. He's claiming equality with God. This was earth-shattering stuff to a Jewish religious leader at the time, or even a Jewish citizen. Let's continue in verse 24. "Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life. He does not come into judgment, but is passed from death to life. Truly, truly, I say to you, an hour is coming and is now here when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself. And he has given him all authority. He's given him authority to execute judgment, because he is the Son of Man. Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming when all who are in the tomb will hear his voice and will come out. Those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of judgment." So lastly, Jesus explains that, like the Father, he has the power and the ability and the authority to grant and to give and to provide eternal life and to bring about the resurrection of the dead. Again, and I'm going to beat the point, but according to the Hebrew Scriptures, only God had that ability. Only God had that authority. Jesus explains to the religious leaders, he also possesses that authority. He's equal to God the Father. He's equal in authority and power. He's equal in honor. And John he doesn't tell us the reaction of the religious leaders here, and you could probably imagine. If they wanted to kill him before, it's probably ramped up a little bit since then. But we don't know. We don't know what the reaction was. But you can imagine. And Jesus, though, knowing that the religious leaders aren't going to accept his own witness, right? His own authority, him just saying these things. He knows they're not going to accept it. So he does this gracious thing, or this loving thing, because he wants them to turn and he wants them to accept him as their Messiah. Right? That's his heart. He's not just needling something here. But in his desire for them to see the truth, to realize and understand who he is, he gives them 4 witnesses. The Mosaic law, you only had to have 3 witnesses. But here Jesus gives them 4 witnesses. Let's read in verse 30. He says, "I can do nothing on my own. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just, because I seek not my own will, but the will of him who sent me. If I alone bear witness about myself, my testimony is not true. There is another who bears witness about me, and I know that the testimony that he bears about me is true. You sent to John, and he has borne witness to the truth. Not that the testimony that I received is from man, but I say these things so that you may be saved. Right? He desires that they be saved. He was a burning and a shining lamp, and you were willing to rejoice for a while in his light. But the testimony that I have is greater than that of John. For the works that the Father has given me to accomplish, the very works that I am doing, they bear witness about me that the Father has sent me. And the Father who sent me has himself borne witness about me. His voice you have never heard, his form you have never seen, and you do not have his word abiding in you, for you do not believe the one whom he has sent. You search the Scriptures, because you think that in them you have eternal life. And it is they that bear witness about me. Yet you refuse to come to me that you may have life. I do not receive glory from people, but I know that you do not have the love of God within you. I have come in my Father's name, and you do not receive me. If another comes in his own name, you receive him. How can you believe when you receive glory from one another and do not seek the glory that comes from the only God? Do not think that I will accuse you to the Father. There is one who accuses you, Moses, on whom you have set your hope. For if you believed Moses, you would have believed me, for he wrote of me. But if you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words? So Jesus gives 4 witnesses in that last part there. He gives 4 witnesses. The first one, John the Baptist. Right? The religious leaders knew him well. They sent delegations to sit and to hear. They sent delegations to question him. They knew John's message. And you remember, it was John who pointed at Jesus and he says, look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Right? The first witness to what Jesus has said is true is John the Baptist. His second one that he gives are his works. Right? More important than the testimony of John, Jesus says that his very works prove what he is saying is true, that he is equal with God, that he is from God, that he is God. His works bear testimony of that. They weren't just for the good of humanity, but they were proof that what Jesus claimed and said were accurate, that were true. Often when Jesus would encounter those who doubted his claims or had difficulties and struggles with what Jesus was claiming, he would tell them, look at the things, consider, observe what I have done, right? And observe his works. If you remember Nicodemus, that's what turned with Nicodemus, right? He saw the things that Jesus did, and he said these only can be done by God. And that's how he got into this wonderful conversation with Jesus. But he observed the things that Jesus had done. And so Jesus says, hey, look at my works. Consider the things that I have done. His third witness was God the Father. And how was God the Father a witness, specifically of what Jesus, of his claims to be God? Well, if you remember at Jesus' baptism, right, what happened? A voice from heaven spoke and said, this is my son. Right, this one. Not a different one. This one. So God the Father in heaven calls out from heaven and he identifies Jesus as being his son, as being equal with him. Jesus' last witness was the Scriptures themselves. Right? He was this fulfillment of all of these prophecies. So Jesus is saying, you search the Scriptures, look in the Scriptures, they speak of me. I'm the one fulfilling these prophecies that your prophets spoke. And I'm the one doing these. Search the Scriptures. The Scriptures even speak of me. And so Jesus, he healed this man on the Sabbath so he could reveal to the religious leaders and to the nation of Israel more clearly who he was. He was God in the flesh, standing in front of them, desiring that they would accept his claim and to believe in him as their Messiah. This is why he got into this is why he healed the man on the Sabbath. I think, as I think about us and I reflect on, really it's the same for us today. Or maybe you're sitting out there and you're in a spot where you haven't really decided who Jesus is. And you've come, you enjoy the service. You come with your parents. You come with one of your friends, someone you love, and you haven't really made this decision who Jesus is. Right? And this is the thing that keeps striking me over and over when Jesus speaks and his actions, is how divisive he is. Not divisive in the sense that he's looking to tear people down, or he's looking to make fun of them, or he's trying to cause all this problems, but he's divisive in the sense that he's looking to push people to make a decision about who he is. Right? He has a plan, he has a desire, he's doing things with the reason to prove who he is, and he's not afraid to push into areas, push into into sacred cows, push into rituals or religious thoughts that cause people to reject him. He's not afraid to do that. So in that sense, he's divisive. He's pushing. He wants you, he wants the religious leaders, he wants the people of Israel, he wants you and me to make a decision who he is. And he's not afraid to push into that. He's not afraid to push into that. So if you're here today and you haven't made that decision who Jesus is, I challenge you to look at the things that he's done. Look at the things that Jesus did, that he said, the evidences that he gives, and decide, who is he? Is he the Messiah, the one that God sent, the perfect Son of God, come to this earth to make things right between God and man, or is he not? But examine it. Examine the evidence. This is what Jesus is. He wants you to make this decision. But even more than that, he wants you to decide, he wants you to accept him as the Messiah. Think of a group of people that Jesus, wouldn't want to. It would probably be the Pharisees and Sadducees and these religious leaders who have been persecuting him, who want to kill him. Yet even in his dialogue, we see Jesus reaching out. He's giving them his gracious answer. He's giving them witness after witness. He's giving them miracle after miracle. He's fulfilling prophecy after prophecy with the desire, with his arms out, asking them, speaking to them, pleading with them to accept him as the Messiah. And that's what he's doing with you today. If you haven't put your trust in Jesus, if you haven't put your faith in him as God's Messiah, the one to make things right between you and God, do so today. Do so today. If you have questions about that, come and talk to me. Paul's here in the front. Phil, Matt's over there. Somebody you came with, your loved one, ask. Come and talk. Don't let it sit. Jesus is pushing you to make a decision. He's revealing things about himself so that you will make this decision. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we love you. And we thank you for Jesus. We thank you for the things that he did. We thank you for the things that he said that prove that he is from you, that they prove that he is God, that he is equal with you. If there are those today who have not accepted Jesus' claim as the Messiah King, that they would do so today. They would accept him as the one to make things right between God and man. Again, we love you. We thank you for being so gracious that we see that in your dialogue with the religious leaders of the time. We thank you for that. In your name, amen.